On this DeBacco University video, I'm going to go over this industrial hemp CBD variety trial presented by Kansas State University, and this has a lot of great information that I think growers need to be aware of, so I want to provide a summary here on DeBacco University. All right, let's get into the 2019 Kansas State University Industrial Hemp CBD Variety Trial. Now, as always, if you're looking for more information, here is the citation to go along with the research here, and a link. And on the first page, I'm going to provide with you the general summary, kind of get at some of the main details to help you understand what this study actually shows. So first off, they were looking at outdoor and high tunnel. So while both technically fall under the category of outdoor production, these are different environments. Keep in mind that outdoor grown is outside with full exposure to the elements. And in the study, plants were grown in containers on weed fabric to help fertilizer trials. But other than this, it represents the typical outdoor field conditions. Those plants grown in a high tunnel. This is a structure that looks like a greenhouse, and while it has plastic coverings, we kind of see here, it lacks additional equipment to modify the environment, such as an example of that would be heaters. But it does act as a little bit a way to protect the plants and a little bit more to kind of moderate the temperature. So outdoor interest and concerns with outdoor hemp production is of interest because of reduced infrastructure cost compared to indoor operations. Concerns with outdoor production is unintentional pollination of flowers, which will reduce the total cannabinoids produced by plants as they will divert their energy to seed production. And pollen can easily travel as far as 3 miles, but again, with increasing distance, the percentage of successful pollination will diminish. While an outdoor environment provides many plant necessities for reduced cost production, incidental pollination can reduce the overall yield, and that was one concern by growers choosing to grow in the outdoor environment. Looking at the study objective here. So the study objective was to evaluate commercially available varieties of CBD hemp in south central Kansas grown in containers outdoors or inside of a high tunnel, to test whether the covered high tunnel could effectively reduce pollination of the plants within it. Again, to try to maximize those yields. So what was studied here? So let's look at the plant material that was utilized in the substrates as well. On June 17, 2019, clones from rooted cuttings of each variety, located here in Table 1, were potted in 1-gallon plastic pots into 7-gallon plastic pots or into 7-gallon fiber bags. The pots and bags were filled with soilless potting substrate composed of pine bark made by Happy Grow and 1/2 inch of screened pine bark nuggets in a 1-to-1 volume ratio, amended with 2 pounds per cubic yard of dolomitic limestone. So this is great that this study provides you this level of detail to give you an idea of exactly the conditions these plants were subject to. As far as the variety and the source, you can see it right here. Some that might be familiar with, some you may not be familiar with. These are all generally favoring the cannabinoid CBD. Now the fertilizer treatments. So 2 fertilizer treatments were studied, each incorporated into the growing substrate. Fertilizer rates were determined to ensure an equal amount of nitrogen in both treatments. So they didn't just give everything the same, they wanted to make sure there's an equal and consistent amount of nitrogen across all treatments. Fertilizer 1 was conventional controlled release fertilizer at 14.5 pounds per cubic yard of Osmocote Plus 15912. You can see an example of that right here. That included micronutrients as well. So that's what the plus stands for. Fertilizer 2 is an organic chicken manure-based fertilizer called Turfmate 423 right here. It's incorporated at 65 pounds per cubic yard. In a micronutrient fertilizer, Micromax, pictured right here, was added to the substrate at 1.5 pounds per cubic yard to compensate for the lack of micronutrients present in that organic fertilizer. Again, this is the great thing about scientific trials, that it offers this kind of comparison and tries to keep some things equal and limit the variability. So the outdoor and high tunnel layout. So plants were placed outdoors on a container production pad or in an adjacent high tunnel. For the outdoor plants, they were placed on black ground cloth and fastened to a trellis wire to prevent blowing over in the wind. And the spacing, plants were in rows 6 feet apart with 4 feet spacing in the row. Great for growers looking at what type of spacing they should use in their layout. For the high tunnel, it was 20 feet by 99 feet, and the plants were placed on the same black fabric, ground cloth, on the soil surface as the outdoor plants, so that was kept consistent. Covering was clear polyethylene covered at the top of the high tunnel with 30% white shade cloth over that. The sidewalls and end walls were covered with insect exclusion screen to prevent insect pollinators from easily entering the high tunnel. And for spacing, the plants are spaced on a 4x4 grid pattern, just as you can see here, as this is an image from the trial. Now, the pruning method, irrigation, and general experimental design. For pruning method, on June 21st, each terminal growing point was removed or pinched to encourage lateral branching. The plants had been pinched twice previously while in the 1-gallon plastic pots. For irrigation, throughout July, plants were hand-watered every other day. For the remainder of the season, plants were watered daily via micro-irrigation spray stake in each container, again, to help offer consistency. The experimental design was a randomized complete block design with split plot arrangement of treatment, and the whole plot was high tunnel or outdoors, while subplots were container type and fertilizer form. Data was analyzed with ANOVA and mean separated with Fisher protected LSD testing for those looking at the stats. In-season nitrogen deficiency was noticed, though, and this is kind of a picture from the trial. By late July, outdoor plants fertilized with the organic fertilizer were smaller and displayed symptoms of nitrogen deficiency or chlorosis in figure 2, as we can see right here, compared to plants on conventional fertilizer. Since this was kind of noticed in season to prevent crop loss, outdoor and high tunnel plants with organic fertilizer were top dressed with conventional controlled release fertilizer, Harrell's 17.6 12 at 120 grams per container on July 29th. Prior to fertilizer application, chlorophyll readings were taken on all plants with a handheld chlorophyll meter or a SPAD meter. One measurement was taken on each of the 3 individual fully mature leaves per plant, an average to obtain chlorophyll reading per plant. Again, great to know where those numbers that you can look at came from. That was a great explanation in their materials and methods. So, influence of container type. So there was no influence of container type on any of the growth data collected. Data wasn't shown, so data presented are averaged across container type, the plastic pots, and the fiber bags. So there was no difference, so they just kind of merged them together. Now the chlorophyll content readings, as I talked about earlier, how they were kind of collected, this is the actual data generated. In the fertilizer form, organic or conventional influenced all variety chlorophyll content. Plants growing with organic fertilizer had lower chlorophyll concentrations than plants fertilized with conventional fertilizer. An interaction between fertilizer, form, and exposure, meaning high tunnel or outdoors, was observed in varieties AC/DC, cherry, and the wife. In these 3 varieties, there was a decrease in chlorophyll concentration between conventional and organic fertilizer. However, the difference was magnified outdoors compared to the high tunnel produced plants. The chlorophyll concentration of plants fertilized with conventional fertilizer in the high tunnel compared to outdoor plants fertilized with conventional fertilizer were nearly identical. And if you want to take a short pause of the video here and look at this slide here, this is the data actually presented, looking at organic and conventional fertilizers on the outdoors and in the high tunnel situations. Now, looking at the plant height, only AC/DC and cherry height were affected by fertilizer form, and their response was opposite, which is kind of interesting. Plant height of all varieties was highly influenced by exposure, meaning growing environment. The high tunnel plants were much taller than the outdoor plants. And this is likely due to the less wind and reduced photoinhibition that occurred in that environment. For CBD hemp, plant height is less important than the amount of floral material, so take a look at the next slide, but you can take a pause here and look at this data presented. Now, the number of colas. The primary number of colas per plant was strongly influenced by the high tunnel environment in all varieties. Both cherry and super CBD were only influenced by the high tunnel, whereas the other varieties were also influenced by the fertilizer form, and an interaction was observed. All cherry plants in the outdoor plot had completely senesced by the experiment termination, while the high tunnel plants were alive and appeared as expected at harvest time. Conventional fertilizer increased cola number in AC/DC, Otto 2 Stout, and the wife. There was a greater than 100% increase in cola number in the high tunnel. The wife plants with conventional compared to organic fertilizer, 68.6 compared to 32.6 respectively. So just an important note there. And we can see again the information, which is great about these scientific studies. If you're looking at comparing these varieties and not just looking at anecdotal information, here's some scientific carried out studies. Now when we look at fresh weight, considering the differences in plant height and number of primary colas, it is not surprising that plants in the high tunnel had greater fresh weight at harvest time. So just taking that previous observations, not surprising here. In many instances, fresh weight was doubled in high tunnel compared to outdoor plants. Additionally, the conventional fertilizer also positively influenced the plant fresh weight. In the combination of the protected environment of the high tunnel that produced taller plants and the improved nutrient source that created more highly branched plants, evident by the increased number of colas, resulted in overall increased plant biomass at harvest time. Again, you can look at the data here, presented generally in the same form, but in this case, Table 5 looking at fresh weight. Now, the cannabinoid production for the outdoor plants, overall low cannabinoid production due to not unexpected due to the fiber and dual purpose variety trial plot approximately 400 feet north of the high tunnel and outdoor CBD variety plot. High rates of pollination were anticipated with those outdoor plants. The wife had the highest CBD content at 4.6%. This variety also appeared to have the most well-developed female flower buds and the lowest quantity of seeds, which would correlate with the highest CBD content or cannabinoid production. THC concentrations were all well below the 0.3 threshold for industrial hemp in all varieties, so that's an important note to make. And we can see that again presented on the data right here. However, when we go to the high tunnel plants, this area right here, some seed development was observed, but much less in comparison to the outdoor plants. CBD concentration reached as high as 9.9% and 10.5% in the wife and cherry respectively. And this is likely due to lower rate of pollination. THC was detected in most of the samples and was below that 0.3% for industrial hemp. However, THC in ACDC was reported to be 0.4%, so that could be a little note of kind of concern there. However, for everything else, definitely below that 0.3% threshold. The researchers also made notes on pest pressure. So although data was not collected, significant pests were noted throughout the growing season. And this is important not only for this trial, but if you're looking at growing industrial hemp in general, to be on a lookout for these particular pests. For outdoor plants, the pest pressure was spotted cucumber beetles, as we can see right here. Early in the season, damage was mostly cosmetic and restricted primarily to foliar feeding. Eurasian hemp borer was noted on several outdoor plants, causing damage to the flower buds. No control efforts were attempted for this pest. Now in the high tunnel, armyworms were a nuisance and primarily controlled by scouting and removal by hand, and their presence did not appear to have any significant impact on the plants. Russet mites were extensive on individual plants during an outbreak, and heavily infested plants were removed and replaced, and lightly infested plants were pruned to remove infested branches. Protective sprays 2 times weekly for 2 weeks of pyrethrin, which is in the form of pyganic, and Zendra tank mix seem to control the pest for the remainder of the growing season. So again, keep in mind to be on the lookout for these particular pests because they were shown in this study to affect potentially the plants. Now, study objectives revisited here. Well, evaluate commercially available varieties of CBD hemp in south central Kansas grown in containers outdoors or inside that of a high tunnel. Container did not impact plants to any measurable degree, so that's an important note to make. That really didn't matter what container the plants were grown in. As far as varieties go, the wife and cherry varieties produced the greatest amount of CBD in both outdoor and high tunnel environments. High tunnel grown plants produce greater CBD percentages than outdoor plants due to the reduced amount of pollination, which is an important note. To test whether a covered high tunnel could effectively reduce pollination of plants within, while some seed development was observed in the high tunnel, there was much less pollination compared to plants in an outdoor plot. And that's a very important note to make, that maybe it is justifiable to have that expense of the high tunnel. So lastly, just a quick general summary of the data. For outdoor, organic fertilizer should be used with caution due to the potential for increased nitrogen deficiency. In the high tunnel environment, I'd recommend if the chance for pollination exists in a particular field, make sure to be using insect netting on sidewalls. You also want to scout for russet mites and armyworms, as they were a notable pest in this study. In general, the wife and cherry varieties should be considered if the percent CBD is the main goal, while still keeping THC levels below that 0.3 threshold. Using a high tunnel will likely increase yields. The question to growers is, can the cost of the high tunnel be justified by the difference presented here? So this is the important part about this study, to give you some information, and now you have to take this information and see how well it may apply to your particular growing situation. Best of luck.